Hey everyone, so I wanted to make a quick video on how I use EMAs. Just a couple of things before I do anything. The EMAs that I do use are the 513, 15, and the 200, and I want to talk about the minor and major crossover and how I use it with support and resistance. So, for those that are not familiar with EMAs and how to use them, I'll just kind of briefly talk about it. I'll do a better video next time. But basically, with the minor crossover, we're looking at the 5 and 13 EMAs. So the minor crossover is more like a short term type of trend. Typically, I use this for entries, but it can be very, very volatile, meaning that it can be affected by the price a lot. So it is useful, but to a certain extent. And I'm only going to show you guys some of the stuff that I use for it specifically because there's more that I do with EMAs in general that I use. So the gist of it for the minor crossover, for all of these crossovers in general, is that we wait for this crossover depending on the situation, right? So what we would look for is if it's going to be a selling position, we look for 5 to cross below the 13. So that is an indication for us to sell, but we're not going to sell it blindly. We're going to wait for a break and then we're going to wait for a retest. So we still have to mark up our support and resistance zones, areas, supply demand, whatever you guys want to call it. So for a buy position, we look for 5 that has to cross above 13. So the major crossover, now this one is more of a longer trend, and we're going to be using the 50 and the 200 EMA for this one. So it's the same concept that if the 50 crossed below the 200, that's going to be a sell, either a sell position or a sell bias. If we want to go for a buy or a buy bias, we're going to go for 50 crossing above the 200. So with the longer trend, a lot of this, the 50 and the 200 EMAs, a lot of that is actually being used by hedge funds. They call it like the golden cross or something, or the death cross. So just if you wanted to, you can look that up on your own. I'm not gonna go in depth with it because I there's other moving averages as well. I just specifically use the EMAs, and they're called the exponential EMAs. But this is just something really quick and something I wanted to throw together. But the goal is to wait for all of these EMAs to cross over for a better trend, better entry, better price, that kind of gist. The reason I'm kind of separating both is because we will use the major crossover to determine the longer trend. This is typically very, very good on a higher time frame, in which I'll give you guys example for that. And the minor crossovers just kind of help, like I said, with things that are shorter term, things for entries. So we're going to take a look at the chart, and I have the US 30, and I have examples of all of this. So the EMAs are going to be yellow for the 5, 13 for the blue, 50 for the green, and 200 for the red. So as you guys can see with the minor crossover, just looking at it, you guys can see that all the EMAs have basically panned out. So then you're like, well, okay, cool. So I know that everything's crossed over. So how do I really use it? So if we look over here with the red arrow that we have that crossover, but we're not going to take it blindly. Remember, we have to make sure that we have zones, supply and demand, support and resistance, things are lows and highs, things that we have marked to help utilize these EMAs. You don't want to just blindly use it. You're going to really burn your account and yourself. So, a couple of things once we've established that, hey, you know what, there's a crossover, is there a level that I'm looking at that, if it breaks, I'm going to do a retest for it. So, perfect example, we have this low that was right here hold on, let me move this. I think it was on the 18th of September. So there's this low right here. Actually, I didn't even mark that properly. Nope, not do that. I'm going to put it right here. Perfect. So we have that crossover. We have a level right here for support. That was support that now turned into resistance. And that crossed over, we would basically wait for that to come crashing down as far as it can, wait for that retest, and you can enter with confidence that it's gonna retest this area, that previous low, or it's gonna retest either the blue, the 13, or the yellow line, the 5. So it's one of those. So once you see this type of setup, there's a high probability that this is gonna continue further down. Now this is on a 5 minute. You still have to go on your higher time frames just to make sure that everything is still going to the trend that you're going for, which is why if you go maybe on hourly and you see that, okay, things are also going down, we also have these minor crossovers that are happening in an hourly time frame, then cool, definitely throw a really solid position for this trade. So let's say you missed on it. Not a big deal. Everything is still fine. You still have everything completely crossed over, because remember, the goal is to wait for the EMAs. But you don't want to use it, but there's always a limitation to it. So you don't want to keep just writing it down, meaning like, oh yeah, I'm going to keep going for it, keep going for it. There's still a limitation. I usually do, for example, like this, I'll usually do a couple of pushes down, and then that's basically it. But let's say you missed it because you weren't paying attention, not a big deal. It still looks pretty solid. We still have a bit of a gap between these EMAs, and it's still going down. Same concept, wait for a low or look for a low or any high, and wait basically for that retest. Let it go down, do what it wants to do, wait for that retest, and look at that. Perfect example. And then another one final push for it to go down. You guys will see that there is that crossover that happens. So wait, same concept, wait for it to push down. There's the low here, so you could have gone for this low, or even if, let's say, you saw this and you want to go for this low, you can go for that as well. It's all honestly up to how else you trade, and other strategies that you have. So this is more for a short position. All you have to do is just reverse it for a position, for a buying position. But that's the gist of it, and that's how I basically trade it. I will put my stop losses right around here, kind of above it. So, for example, the first crossover that we have right here, I'll have my stop loss right around this area. Just be careful, because sometimes it might actually go up higher than intended, and that's okay. Depends on your position as well, your lot size. If you're really throwing on a pretty decent size lot size for that, definitely just make sure you take that into consideration, because there's been a handful of situations where price decides to push up higher, but for the most part, there is a high probability, like I said, for these type of situations to happen all the time. It usually, when these type of moves, I will say they are roughly around like the London and or New York opens, just because price will push those opens. Price gets pushed down or pushed up. There's a lot more volume, momentum, and orders basically coming in. That is ideal for these type of situations. So this is really good to kind of know how to use moving averages, EMAs, SMAs. Like I said, I personally use EMAs. It's totally up to you. It doesn't matter what numbers you use, you just have to know how to use it. So I could have actually use 20s and 50s as well. It cleans up real well. Same concept. It's a lot cleaner because there's one less EMA, but same idea. Crossover, we're anticipating that move, waiting still for that retest because we know that there's a low. We're waiting for price to retest that area again. Same thing, boom, wait for that to go down. Same concept. Now, if there isn't a crossover here, but you guys will notice that sometimes that these prices like to do a retouch to the EMAs. Now, the one that I have here is a 20. Actually, I'll type it up right here. The one that I have right here specifically is the 20, 50, and the 200. I always have the 20, 50, and I'm sorry, I always have the 50 and the 200 because, like I said, those are two EMAs or moving averages just in general that a lot of people pay attention to the most, and you guys will see why. Right? I'm gonna take a look at here. Let's see. Oops, that's not it. You guys can see that with the 200 EMA or just moving averages, it really shows the trend that happens with the 200. And you'll notice too, it's kind of right around this area is just kind of consolidating and it can't make up its mind. Once price is able to make up its mind, for example, right here, that all of the EMAs started pushing through, it starts to keep going down. As long as there's a massive move down and price isn't getting close to the 200 and even like not getting too close to the 50 as well, for the most part, it's going to keep going. You just kind of have to use your own discernment on how you trade it and how your strategy is as well. Anyways, I hope this was helpful. If you guys have any questions about using EMAs or anything like that, or moving averages and how else to use it, let me know. But this is the simplest way that I use it, and I still use it to this day, and that's how I make really basically good money doing it. It's simple, it's easy, doesn't really take much of a thought process. You just kind of wait. That's it. All you have to do is just wait and have proper risk management, and you're fine for the most part.